Hey folks, welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio, where we talk exclusively about the Beatles and welcome all kinds of guests from the Beatles world. And one guest of mine who's been on this channel, and I'm sure is gonna turn up, he has turned up on things we said today. Have you been on Talk More Talk?
Yeah. Not sure. They're like one whole big Ken Michaels bowl of awesome here that I just,
Thank
wherever
you.
it's needed.
That's quite a compliment there. Anyway,
Nice.
but Tom Frangione, and I'm going to call him that from now on. My whole life I called him Frangione, but Paul McCartney himself called him Frangione. Therefore,
True.
permanently, he has been ordained
Yeah,
Frangione. So you have no
that's
choice
right.
in the matter.
That's right. And in these circles and he shall be Frangione.
So anyway, the reason I invited Tom on is because ever since I've known him, he has touted Paul McCartney's Tug of War album as not only Paul's best album, but the best solo Beatle album of all time. Now, that's a pretty tall order right there.
It's a
And
mouthful for sure.
I love hearing people that have different opinions. And I know that many of you think Tug of War is a great album, me included. But we're going to, try to pick Tom's brain here and find out why he feels this particular way about Paul, who's made many, in my opinion, and Tom's opinion, many
Sure.
great albums.
Sure. Yeah.
Before we do, let me just ask you, did you feel this way about Tug of War from the get-go, from first listen, or is this an album that, you just appreciated more and more through the years?
No, it was a rare kettle of fish for Paul McCartney. I've been a Paul fan and Beatle fan, obviously, my whole life. But growing up in the 70s, I mean, those were my high school years. And to be clear, I wasn't in high school for all of the 70s, not all 9 years, okay?
Mhm.
Yeah. But his albums, if I took, I don't know, take the three, four before that, whether it's Back to the Egg, McCartney 2, London Town, whatever. I'd listen to them and first listen through, go, oh yeah, I like that one. This one I got to come back and listen to again. This one, maybe later. This one, fantastic, and craft my own opinion, as I'm sure that a lot of people do, I guess, on a first listen, right?
Hmm.
And this one was different. I picked this one up on my way home from school, went to the record store where I was working at the time, picked it up, went home, popped myself in between the two speakers, and of course had already heard just the one song, had heard Ebony and Ivory. It had been a single and
Mm.
monster record. You couldn't escape it that spring.
Right.
But putting that album on, I was captured right from the get-go. The little acoustic and some of the sound effects at the beginning, and I'm going, all right, I know he's done stuff like this and the acoustic thing and it's solo. All right, where's this going? And as soon as those electric guitars came in with In Years to Come, wham.
Mm.
Um, I was on the ride for the next 45 minutes. That was it. I was completely captivated. Certainly by the end of the first song, I mean, I didn't realize this at the time, but I know that at the end of the first song, listening to those strings, I heard, I said, well, certainly that's George Martin and
Mm.
Paul doing a little of their magic. And oh, it's a medley to start. The first two songs on the McCartney album are a medley. I didn't sit there and go, my, how original. He's done it before. He's done it with the Beatles. He's done it with, or if not a medley, but a segue at least.
Right.
He's done it on his solo records. He's done it on Beatle records. So I said, okay, we're in good tradition here. That's good. A great acoustic ballad on side one. Look, there was a lot riding on this album. It
Mm.
was the first album he was making after we lost John. All eyes were going to be front and center. And I kind of believe he knew that this was where people were going to start reassessing not just who was better or who was the best Beatle, but it was going to cause us, I think, to take a look at the work that each of them made since the Beatles and do all kinds of postulating of why the four parts never equaled the whole. Why couldn't it have been that way? And he he rose to the occasion. I mean, in high fashion. He hedged a lot of bets here. Okay.
Hmm.
He's got George Martin producing it. Okay. He's got Jeff Emmerich engineering it. He brought Ringo back. Okay. He had a lot riding on this. And this, as we've come to learn, through interviews he's done and stories we've read and great research, I just can't help, going to these McCartney books. I cannot wait to see the third volume of Adrian and Alan's McCartney Legacy book when they get into Tug of War. But there was a lot riding on this album, and it wasn't going to be a Wings album.
And that
And
was George Martin's influence.
um, not as much as we first thought. I love starting sentences like this. You know what Paul told me when I asked him about that? Uh, no, he said though the players like the Philip Jones, the brass ensemble, or any of the string players and things, that was George. He says, but the band, that was mine. He picked those guys. And, look, Denny was a good soldier for solid 10 years at that point. And, Denny had, raised a couple of flags as a collaborator would do. But this was one where Paul had no room for error. He had no, I don't want to say he didn't have room for, outside influence. He sure opened the door for George Martin to help him out. But it wasn't going to be Denny Lane setting the direction of this record. And ultimately, this is when Denny and Paul part ways, is during these sessions.
Hmm. Well, from all that I remember hearing, George Martin said to him, "Don't make this a Wings album. This should be you solo." I don't even remember going back to my days at WDHA. The word was, Linda said, Paul always said, I want to have Ringo on my record. So
Well,
I
it
call
took
him.
a decade.
You want, you want to have Stevie Wonder on your record? Call him.
Yeah,
Have Carl Perkins on your record? Call him. So,
yeah.
this is something that I guess had been brewing for a while. But remember, some of these songs and songs that ended up on Pipes of Peace were songs that Wings rehearsed too.
Oh,
So
sure.
they could have been Wing songs.
Yeah, the problem with that was that, Wings themselves were falling apart following, it's 81, right after John dies. Paul had done his service in Japan. That was
Mm,
that was done. Wings kind of was dissolving as it went, but they were still hanging around. So Lawrence Juber is still around. He's recording tracks with Paul and Ringo for Stop and Smell the Roses, right? It's not
right?
like they just went their separate ways.
Hmm.
But Wings certainly weren't touring then. Paul, I think, had said maybe we'll lay off the road a bit here. But then after what happened to John, I mean, 80 is just, I mean, the bookends of that year between what happened in January and certainly what happened in December. I mean, it was just a bad year.
Mm,
And there was some stuff in between there too. Didn't make it a great year for the Beatles. I mean, even the tough year. I mean, Beatle George hands in a record and they say, "What else you got?" I
right.
mean, it's not a good year for the band. But yeah, going back to the players, Paul had said he kind of picked them, and maybe that was after some direction from George saying, "Don't make it a Wings album." Well, then go pick the players, pick the Stevie Wonders, the Steve Gadds, the people like that for the record. So he does end up picking who will be on that album, and the Ringo factor is great. I mean,
Mhm.
look at all the cross pollination. Ringo playing on John records, John playing on Ringo records, Ringo playing on George records, George playing on Ringo records, George playing on John records. We had virtually every combination that didn't include the name Paul, right? That was a separate kettle of fish. Beatle people were just that was separate. And here for the first time on one of his records anyway, he's getting the band back together a little bit. And sure it was quote just Ringo, but you add George Martin and Jeff Emmerich to the mix,
Hmm.
and you are going to be steeped in some Beatles sounds for sure.
Right. So how much of your admiration for this album is due to Is it more the songwriting? Is it more the production? Because let's face it, Paul's worked with a lot of great producers in his
Hmm.
career, but most
Well,
people would say there's nobody more ideal than
yeah.
George Martin.
Well, I mean, I've got the utmost respect for George Martin. He made, some of Paul's very best records, uh, both with the Beatles and after, of course.
Hmm.
But I think it's a little of both. I think one kind of feeds off the other. So arrangements and things and songwriting. The first thing that I think George Martin did that added value is go through the tracks like a producer would and
Okay.
say, this is one that's got, we can do a lot of things here. This one, maybe we'll revisit. And certainly there was enough material for a double album. We know that from the rehearsal tapes and the songs that start out in Tug of War land that end up on Pipes of Peace. There was certainly enough for a double album.
Hmm.
And ripping a page out of the old White Album, barroom trivia and arguments. Would it be better as a single album or as a double album? And to be clear, I think the White Album is fine just the way it is.
Right.
Thank you very much. But here, George helped Paul pare that list down. And as Paul said, if you have enough material for a really good double album, it means you generally have material for one superb album, one terrific album. And that's what he went for here. There'd be no dilution this time around. Again, I think he made some very shrewd and calculated moves in terms of how this record would be rolled out, how it would present itself, how it would be produced. Yeah, he could have gone real easy right after all those years ago. First single could have been Here Today.
Hmm.
Would have been, you know, anybody could have made that decision. He said, no, that'll be right there when you have to sit back and you're gonna have to get up and turn the album over anyway to give you something to think about. Placing it at the end of side one was a really good place for that.
Hmm.
So the sequencing on it, I think, is terrific. Um, Talking about Ebony and Ivory, you know, as a single, I mean, it was a monster record, right? The most successful of his or any of the solo Beatles in terms of chart success here in America.
It's true.
And it it kind of has a perfect place reserved for itself at the end of the album. Everything resolves there. There's a lot of conflict and resolution. And as Paul put it, due to him being, as he believes, a lot of it due to him being a Gemini, a lot of that being a twin.
Hmm.
Ebony, Ivory, black and white, tug of war, pushing, pulling. Although I
Types
don't
of
suppose
peace.
there's not a lot of pushing in tug of war now, is there? But
No.
anyway, no. But all those opposites and things, all that conflict and resolution resolves itself nicely at the end. If that song had been in the middle of side one somewhere, I'm not sure I could resequence that album and put that song anywhere but at the very end.
I will tell you, and I am a major fan of Ebony and Ivory
Hmm.
and a major fan of Stevie Wonder. My biggest dream of all time would be if Paul and Stevie Wonder made a whole album together.
Oh, be
So
fantastic.
I was so grateful we got Ebony and Ivory and also What's That You're Doing. But over the years, that song has gotten a lot of flack. As
Well,
people,
it's gotten a lot of flack, and look, I guess when you're Paul McCartney, you can say, really, how many songs that successful have you written?
hmm.
Um, but he told me this story, Ken, that years later he was doing a session with a guy in LA who was in an interracial marriage, and he said, "Thank you for doing that song. That meant a lot to us."
Hmm.
Like, a message from on high like that. That was important to us, and thank you for doing it. He said, and that's the payoff. I mean, and then of course he acknowledged. He said, of course, Stevie, or rather Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo had to have a poke on it on Saturday Night Live. Well, what don't they make fun of on Saturday Night Live? Everything from whoever's the hottest music artist to the president to whatever's in the news to whatever. I mean,
Hmm.
that's what they do. I guess in a way you could say the only reason you should have been worried is if they didn't poke fun of it.
Hmm.
Uh, again, you can't argue with the numbers. Um, it was a number one hit for what, 9 weeks, something
Seven
like
weeks.
7 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it was a monster record, and deservedly so.
Well, even though this may be a detour from our conversation, I always take a look at how well songs charted at the time. A lot of people don't put much weight into that. It's more how you feel about the song today, as opposed to
Hmm.
how well it performed back then.
Hmm.
And as far as I'm concerned, it was number one for 7 weeks. It's not only a good song, they sound great together, but you take a look at the entire catalog of Paul, all the great songs that he's written. A lot of people wouldn't put Ebony and Ivory in the upper hierarchy of it all. But, I love it. I will always defend it. But
Yeah.
some people care more about, let's put it to you this way, as a radio guy, I hardly ever hear Ebony and Ivory on the radio.
Yeah.
Not talking about your channel.
Of course, no.
Okay.
Big old asterisk there. Yeah.
If
No,
you ever
it's.
listen to classic rock radio, you're still going to hear Ben on the Run. You're still going to hear Jet. You're still
Mhm.
going to hear, well, they play Let Me Roll It, partly because Paul will not let go of that song.
Yeah. But no, you'll hear Junior's Farm and Live and
Yeah.
Let Die and a
Right.
lot of big
Maybe I'm
records like that.
amazed.
No, and some of the songs are of their time. Look, you mentioned What's That You're Doing? Great groove.
Hmm.
Stevie and Paul locked in like crazy. And yeah, that was, I used to go out, to bars and clubs and hear that song being played. That was a big thing. It was a good dance record. Still is a good dance record.
Uh-huh.
But it's that one, if there's a song on that album that sounds locked in or really locked in of its time, it'd be that one.
Hmm.
I mean, for me, I mean, look, you take another song, I mean, take, I don't know, Tug of War or Take It Away, which is great, great pop, great, rock and roll. But yeah, What's That You're Doing? It doesn't mean I like it any less. I actually love that record.
Right. Well, I don't care about whether a song is dated or not. That's an issue that we bring up all the time on my podcast. It has no
Yeah.
bearing as to whether or not I still like it.
Yeah, but some Paul records, and I think the quintessential example is Ram. Ram sounds like it could have been made yesterday
Hmm.
or 55 years ago. It would be hard to pigeonhole that record and say, "Oh boy, listen to the synthetic drums. That's 80s all over it or whatever."
Right.
It's it's got such a natural sound to it, and his voice is really pure, and there's nothing tricked up about it.
Hmm.
That album may have aged better than any of his albums. Aged better, right? I mean, I know you love a lot of his 80s records.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like them too. Sometimes though they seem so of their time that you're working in that little sandbox there. Ram, it just, to me, there it is, all 55 years or whatever it's been of that record.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
but the music industry is all based on trends, and
Of
you don't
course.
know if 10 years from now the sounds of the 80s will sound like it just came out today.
Yeah.
You just don't know. Right
Yeah.
now, Ram sounds like it could have been done yesterday. I
Yeah.
think Venus and Mars sounds like it could have been done yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Driving Rain sounds like it could have been done yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's all those things don't matter as much, but I'm just saying the quality of the song in the case of Ebony and Ivory, it's very simple. I know the message Paul's trying to get. It's a great message, but to some people it's just, too hokey. I mean it's a great
Well,
message.
they said that
Yeah.
okay, short list. Paul McCartney songs that when people heard it said, that's too simple and too hokey. Silly love songs?
Hmm.
Yeah. That's kind of aged pretty well. No? I mean, would you kill or die to hear him do that in concert again?
Absolutely.
Of course. And watch him do it even in the rock show video when he struts across the stage. It's his way of saying, take that.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Another one that came out and people said, what the heck? That's too simple and too hokey. Wonderful Christmas Time. I think that one charted again last year, right? It's
Yep.
one of the most played Christmas records of the modern era.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it sounded like somebody gave Paul a little synthesizer for Christmas and he got to play around with it.
Uh,
That's what he was doing.
right.
Okay. That's what he was doing. And I can't get through Christmas without hearing that song.
Hmm.
I mean, I love that record.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's just stayed
So,
in my head.
so if it's in the company with silly love songs and Wonderful Christmas Time, I'd take it.
Hmm. You mentioned sequencing, which I think is a very important aspect of albums, and I think Paul,
Mhm.
through the years, done an excellent job in sequencing
Mm.
the tracks on his albums. I always find that, well, like you mentioned, Tug of War going smoothly, singing into Take It Away. Originally, I heard that Average Person was supposed to be
Yep.
that song,
Well,
and I could
average
actually
person in
hear
Tug
that.
of War, you could hear those bouncy pianos. I don't want to say they're interchangeable, but you can see that they're kind of cut from the same cloth. Yeah.
Right. And
Right.
usually, Paul on side one in the middle puts a ballad in there.
The ballad, right? The patented ballad right there. Yeah.
Bluebird,
Yeah.
whatever it
Yeah.
is. So somebody who cares is there. And being the big Stevie Wonder fan, I loved What's That You're Doing. Here Today is a tearjerker. You remember on WDHA how often I played ballroom dancing?
Oh, yeah.
That
I
was
mean, that when people tell me, well, yeah, Tug of War is a really good album. It's got a lot of good songs, but you know what it doesn't have? It doesn't have a good rocker. I'm like, really? Where do you start playing side two? I mean, I know where I start playing it, right at the top with ballroom dancing. That'll do
right.
just fine. Yeah.
Yeah, The Pound is Sinking. It's one of those songs that it's a couple of songs that are fragments of songs strung together, and somehow they work.
Yeah, but he's never had success with stuff like that. I mean, just ask Uncle Albert, right? I mean, he's not, come on. That happened in a couple of places on that album, right? Pound is sinking and um why am I blanking now at the end of, toward the end of the album? Dress Me Up as a Robber.
Okay.
The couple of different little parts all making up the whole, which is real, real nice. And then just like you do on the White Album, you
Uh-huh.
get this little link, this very spooky minor chord, echoey vocal, this little be what you see thing. I mean, it's
Uh,
like all the Beatle tricks were there.
hmm.
Yeah.
The wild honey pie of
Well, it's the Can You Take Me Back?
okay.
It's the Can You Take Me Back of this album. Yeah.
Right. Wanderlust. We can't say enough about that song. I can't tell you how many people think that's one of Paul's all-time best in his solo career. And aces to George Martin for the whole brass arrangement.
Well, the brass arrangement, the counterpoint in the vocal,
Right.
just brilliant. And Ringo playing the drums. I mean, it should be that great a record. It should be that great. And of course, like many Paul records, it's this majestic, grand, beautiful production. And it came out of, a little snarky story,
Yes.
you about the catamaran that they were on and got caught smoking pot. And the the captain tells them I can't have it, and you're going to have to leave, and the whole bit. And they get on another boat, and the captain liked them, and certain rules got bent a little bit, and there they were, and here you go. The boat's name was Wanderlust.
Right.
There you go.
His homage to the boat.
Yes, I mean, and again, it starts out with a little snarky little thing and
Yeah.
some simple chords,
Right.
very, very simple, 1 and 5 chords. And what saves it is what saves 95% of his songs, an incredible melody line,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that one was so good. It had two great melody lines. You couldn't pick one. So he bounced one off the other toward the end there. I mean, come on.
I miss that side of Paul. I wish there were more counter melodies.
Oh, yeah.
Hasn't done that, I think, for a while.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people didn't really realize that because after the first brass break, when he sings "Where Did I Go Wrong, My Love,"
Hmm.
all that, it's the same chord pattern. Well, it would have to be the same chord pattern if
Right.
both melodies are going to sit over it. So, by the time he did it after the second brass interlude and both parts were being sung, it glued together perfectly.
It's so brilliant to be able to write two melodies around the same chords. It's not as easy
Yep.
as it sounds.
No, no, it is not.
Yeah. Your thoughts about our pal, Carl Perkins?
Ah,
Tom
I
and
love.
I interviewed Carl a couple of times, and one of them was with Tom.
Yeah. Oh,
Actually,
that was great fun.
the first time I ever heard the story about my old friend with him talking about it was in that interview. And now a lot of people have
Yeah.
heard the story.
Well, you know what was interesting, Ken, is that interview we did. It was at the time the Go Cat Go album and his
Right.
biography, Go Cat Go, had both come out, and I believe you kind of handled the record album side of it, and I handled the book side or whatever. But they got we were a cover story in Goldmine magazine,
Yeah.
and here we are years after that. I'm sure you saw it when the New York Times was writing about Now and Then, just
Mm.
a year and a half ago. They
Yeah.
said, Paul, had written this song and or rather recorded this song with Carl Perkins, and it said, "Think about me every now and then." And I'm like, "Where'd they get that from?" Had to go dig my copy out and make sure I wasn't dreaming that one up. But Carl Perkins, um, was just one of the nicest people you could ever hope to meet in the music business or anywhere else. But Carl was the perfect example in my life of something that has been said for many years. You want to go learn something new or appreciate some new music or discover an artist, go to the people you liked and see what turned them on.
Hmm.
Now, they were all big fans of Carl Perkins, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And
Right.
I kind of discovered Carl Perkins through the Beatles. Well, of course, they covered a few of his songs. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, and a few more on the BBC. Yeah, I get it. But then, I mean, you don't have to look much further than that Rockabilly special that he taped in the end of 85,
85.
85. Yeah, it aired in 86 with George and Ringo there to see the reverence that they had for him. And then there's a really good video out called My Old Friend
Mm.
of Paul and Carl doing much the same, backstage jamming, playing some acoustics. The level of reverence that they have for him
Right.
is unparalleled. I mean, yeah, they all loved Little Richard, they all loved Elvis, they all loved Chuck Berry, but I think Carl kind of sat at the top of that list for these guys. And Paul, he tells those stories so fondly about working with Carl and meeting Carl even
Mm.
back in the 60s that the reverence and the love that they had for him made him a natural to be on this record, right? He's kind of sort of revisiting his Beatle days. He's got Ringo and George Martin and Jeff Emerick and all that.
Right.
Why not have one of their influences on there? Why not?
Mm.
And it's a great, little country folky number, and it's right up Carl's Strasse. I mean, it's right there.
Yeah.
Why would they do something different than that?
Right.
And of course, they also record the song "My Old Friend" during these sessions, but Carl holds on to that one for his record, which doesn't come out for geez quite a while after that, 15 years or something.
90s.
Yeah. So, but there it was with talking about on the Isle of Montserrat, going right back to the Tug of War sessions. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Carl Perkins and Friends special. That is one of the greatest moments. I mean, for the reasons that you
Ever,
gave, but
ever.
to
Yeah.
watch, and George had not been in the public eye for a few years now, so
Oh,
people were wondering what's going on with him. And here he comes out, and my favorite moment is when they do Your True Love
oh yeah,
it,
yeah.
with Carl and Dave Edmunds and
Dave
George
Edmonds.
trading lead vocals, spoken version of the song. And then this one moment when George does nothing but sit on a stool with
Yeah.
Carl Perkins, and Carl is doing The World Is Waiting for the Sunrise, and he's picking away, and George is like, that's not
Yeah, yeah. George is thinking,
all.
okay, right, things to do. One, go take some lessons. Okay. But he is kind of cool how he just kind of, busts along like, we're waiting for the
Right.
sun. Just kind of keeping that going. But you saw how good a guitar player Carl was right there.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Just, I mean, that's kind of how, look, yeah, I knew Blue Suede Shoes and Matchbox and Honey Don't and all that stuff from the Beatles. But right there, 85, or I guess we saw it in January of 86 or something by the
Mhm.
time it showed up. That's when I said, okay, I am now an official card carrying Carl Perkins fan club devotee. No question.
Right.
That's when I started really saying I got to go hear more of this. I got to know more than Blue Suede Shoes and Honey Don't and Matchbox. I have to. And I've said this before and told Ringo this as well. Ringo's cover of Sure to Fall
Mm.
on Stop and Smell the Roses with Paul doing harmony vocal and Paul produced it and
Right.
all that. That's one of probably my five favorite Ringo recordings. It's so good.
Wow.
So what a beautiful record that is.
Mhm.
Just beautiful. And when that came out, so what's that? Smell the Roses
81.
81.
81.
Um, I'd not fully grasped the whole BBC thing. I wasn't aware at the time, found out soon enough, that that was one the Beatles used to do on the BBC. Right.
Mhm.
So we were still dealing with bootlegs. The big special, Beatles at the BBC, wouldn't show up till 82, I think.
Right.
When those vaults really started to start to spill out. But knowing that it's one that they did back then, and he revisited it all these years later, that meant, that holds a special place.
Yeah. And also at the very end of that special, I was thinking everybody, every musician is sitting down, and it's like it's Carl
Oh
Perkins
yeah.
class.
Yeah. That's
Like
what he
these
said.
are
You
his
should see it
students.
through these old tired eyes. You're looking at a bunch of school kids sitting here. And by the way, the school kids, George Harrison, Ringo, Eric Clapton, Dave Edmonds, no, don't worry about that. And
Yeah.
they're all looking at him in total awe.
Right.
And well, they should. And and Paul, the stories that he told out of Montserrat, not just about my old friend, but about the jam sessions that they'd have down there.
Hmm.
And of course the story behind the big laugh at the end of my old friend. Just
Uh-huh.
some great stories. And you could really feel that love he had for him.
How do you feel about Dress Me Up as a Robber as a song?
I actually, when I went track by track through the album with Paul, we were going chronologically, right? Side one, side two.
Uh-huh.
The only place I went out of order was both with Dress Me Up as a Robber and Pound is Sinking, because I felt those two songs were kind of, you know, same church but different pews. They're songs that have parts of other songs, or they're so stylistically varied that
Mm.
you'd have to say, well, that was from an unfinished song there, Hear Me Lover or whatever it was for
Right.
Pound is Sinking, and how he puts them together in a way where when you don't know any better, like us, when we listen to that for the first time, we say, well, it makes sense. This is what he's doing. He's taking you down one road, and then he's saying, all right, just hold on to that for a minute and let me tell you something else. Okay, we'll get back to that other thing.
Right.
And he seemed very pleased. He said, I'm glad that it makes perfect sense to you. um, but yeah, those are little different bits and pieces, but there's some really great flamenco acoustic guitar in there. And then it's balanced with this real edgy, distorted, back to the egg, dare I say, sound.
Right.
Very sustained, kind of distortion in there. So I like it. I like those for the fact that they're stylistically varied within the same song.
Right. Huh. Do you
I
go
mean,
for,
it worked for Uncle Albert, right? I mean,
well, sometimes when I hear that flamenco, like you were calling it, I think of Good Night Tonight, you know.
absolutely, absolutely.
But the thing that I admire, well, so many reasons I admire Paul McCartney, but he's so varied. He's so eclectic. He's so all over the place. Tug of War is kind of like his White Album in many ways. But you could say that about some other albums of
You
his, where
could,
he's
yeah.
all over the place. He's always diverse.
Yeah.
And to go for that kind of an album, or would you have something that's more focused as a rock album? More like
Um,
more like a Back to the Egg, which still had Baby's Request on there.
yeah, I mean, still had Baby. And you know what? I was listening to Back to the Egg recently, as part of, oh my God, somebody else's podcast that I had to prepare for. Anyway, and I was listening to side one. For as much of an edge as Steve Holly and Lawrence Juba brought to the band, and they did bring a good edge to it. There were some real slick moments there too. So I'm thinking about like Arrow Through Me,
Hmm.
and oh my God, remember we just came off the whole, oh my God, Paul has gone disco, because he put out Good Night Tonight. Again, I was in high school at the time and he's gone disco, right? Because that's all he's ever going to do again. And, you know, Arrow Through Me had kind of that not disco-y, but kind of like a little soul, little blue-eyed soul kind of thing, and the horn bit in there. And even within the same song, he did it. So the first time through, that really nice falsetto could have been a finer thing, could have been a major
Yeah.
attraction. He does it in a falsetto, very much in that soul vein, very much like a Smokey Robinson kind of thing. They come back at the end. He's got to do the chorus again and he's got the natural raw rock voice doing it,
Uh-huh.
and it always left me in a coin flip. I'm not sure which one I like better. They both work like
Right.
crazy. They both work, but he could do that stylistically again within the same song, within the same pattern, the same chord structure, not taking that left turn like he does on Dress Me Up as a Robber or Pound
Mm.
Is Sinking, and still get you that stylistic differentiation within the same song. I mean, it's a gift.
Right. And what he could do with his voice, you know,
Yeah.
especially then.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But so versatile with what he could do. Such a range with
Yeah.
his voice.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I mean,
So,
because when you listen to the falsetto in that point, you're going, okay,
yeah,
maybe, the melody line, if you were reading it on a sheet music, is just going up and up and up, and maybe it's just getting out of a range where it's going to sound natural.
right.
That wasn't it at all. Because the next time he did it, and he did it in his natural voice. I mean, so it was very deliberate, that's for sure.
Sometimes when I hear the melody of that song, I think of Burt Bacharach because
Yeah,
he's known for doing all these weird intervals and his voice is going way up high and then he brings it down to bring your love, all the way
yeah.
down there.
Oh yeah,
It's just amazing.
yeah. Hmm.
Do you think that that Pipes of Peace, there are people who I know love Pipes of Peace, but did it come across to you to some degree as the leftovers that didn't work on Tug of War?
Yes. To me, it is to this day, it's decidedly the B-roll of Tug of War. It's that second list that we were talking about before that George Martin talked about. Now that said, there's some terrific songs on
Hmm.
Pipes of Peace. Okay, how about Pipes of Peace to start?
Right.
Okay. Now, all that duality that we were talking about before, the whole Gemini thing, Tug
Uh-huh.
of War, Pipes of Peace. I get it. Okay. That could have been stylistically side two. Could have been.
Hmm.
Could have been. Um, the dead giveaway is the song Tug of Peace, right? Where they're singing it's a tug of war, and then your trouble cease when you learn to play the pipes of peace. Um, it's not an accident that this is the follow-up album. That's for sure. It's
Hmm.
not an accident. These are songs that were part of this whole project, but in the sense of making a record and delivering a record and a cohesive, polished, grade A record, I think they got the right songs in there. Could you ever sit there and go, well, what if I don't know, what if Pound is Sinking was out and Pipes of Peace was in? I don't know. Just like the White Album. I'm
Uh-huh.
perfectly happy with how this one came out.
Well, Through Our Love was one of my wedding songs.
It's a
So I think
brilliant
that's
song.
one of the greatest love songs of his solo career. I wouldn't have minded if that was on Tug of War. But then he
Yeah,
didn't take out. That's the problem.
yeah. No, that is a brilliant song. No, there's some really good, and there's some good, great little pop songs. I love The Sweetest Little Show in Town.
Uh-huh.
I love that. It's a great, nifty little song. Um, that could have fit on Tug of War. Could have been in there somewhere.
Hmm.
But again, we were dealing in the days, well, I guess CDs had well, no, not yet. 82, no, not yet. 83, I guess, is when the first CDs come. So they're not thinking in terms of CDs yet, about 80 minutes.
Hmm.
They're thinking in terms of 40 to 45 minutes for an album. So,
Right.
yeah.
Your opinion, what was a better collaboration for Paul? Stevie Wonder or Michael Jackson?
Stevie Wonder.
And why so?
Stevie upped Paul's game, I think. Some of the stories Paul has told about working with Stevie, like even in something like Ebony and Ivory, dun 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 dun. He
Yeah.
says, we're doing the clap track, and Stevie would say, no, 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 man, stop. You're not in the pocket. Like, you're like, you got to be a half step behind it or whatever. And Paul's going, what are you talking about? I'm right there. And
Uh-huh.
Stevie's like, no. And Stevie, I think, upped Paul's game musically. Um, Michael, look, I mean, they made a couple great records. Certainly, Say, Girl Is Mine. They made great records.
Hmm.
Okay, the man. But I think the two with Stevie had a little more teeth. Even Ebony and Ivory. I would take Ebony and Ivory over, let's say, Girl Is Mine. Girl Is Mine has a great groove to it. I mean, it's Steve Lukather playing the guitar in there.
Hmm.
That's one I won't lie to you. I had a problem with the whole dialogue thing at the end. The version, whenever I'm making a playlist or a mix CD or back in the day mixtapes, I searched ends of the earth to get that version. I think it was from Israel or something. They pressed it without the dialogue at the end. I said that's the one I want to hear.
Uh-huh.
'Cause I can take that. Um, so yeah, I would go with Stevie on that one.
Okay. Because Say is a great dance track.
Incredible. I mean, look at what they did with it in the box set where they flipped the vocals around.
Uh-huh.
Stevie, or rather the Michael lines, Paul sang and Paul sang the Michael lines. It's an incredible groove. It's a great record.
Yeah. By
Great
the
record.
way, Lawrence Juber.
I knew there had to be a by the way in there somewhere.
Uh-huh.
If you know, you know.
Lawrence Juber has said to me on numerous occasions since you mentioned Goodnight Tonight, that is not a disco song. It's a
It's a
dance.
dance record. It's a dance record. Okay. But it was 1979. And you know what they called dance records then? Disco records. And
I
by
need
the
to
way,
see the by the way.
when you bought that beautiful 12-inch single with them in the tuxedos and Linda in the
Uh-huh.
gown and the whole bit, what did the sticker on the front of it say? 12-inch disco single. I think they may have meant that as like the noun, not the adjective, like a disco as a place where you go dancing. This is a record that you play in a club, which we would soon enough call it.
Hmm.
But yeah, to this day, it's a great dance record.
Okay. Now, since you interviewed Paul, did you actually tell him that you think this is the best solo album of all time?
Absolutely. I've
How did he
told, and
respond?
he thought that was a mouthful. He thanked me. Um, I actually said, this that the record had a profound impact on me. It came out at a very important time in my life and important time in his life. He was turning 40. It was sort of a big thing, right? And I said, I think it's the best album any of the four of you made since the Beatles. And he was like, wow. I said, yeah, there's plenty there to like. I said, I actually called. I said, but look, at the end of the day, it's a favorite among many favorites, not only of his, but of his other bandmates.
Yeah.
There are there are many favorites that I would consider, certainly top shelf, grade A, number one, top shelf, whatever you want to call solo records. There are plenty of them, plenty of them. This one to me, you look, you've seen that show, or at least know of the show, Desert Island Discs.
Right.
You can't take them all with you.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Take 10. And what 10 records are you taking? This would be in my 10. Now, when people ask me that, I always have to put a qualifier on it. Like when they say, what's your favorite album of all time? What's your favorite song of all time? I always have to differentiate between the Beatles, proper, the Beatles,
Hmm.
and everybody else. Okay. Look, if I'm going to pick 10 albums, in all likelihood, they're going to be by the Beatles. Okay. It would happen. I mean, which one of those aren't you taking with you? But when it comes to the solo records, and there are plenty of them, this would be at the very top of my list.
How would you respond? I mean, if you were to do most surveys,
Mhm.
All Things Must Pass, I think usually tops the list
Yeah.
amongst fans.
Let me
Ain't
tell
no
you,
denying how great All Things Must Pass is.
you know what's wrong with All Things Must Pass? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Okay. It's a great record. It gets extra credit because there's so much of it, right?
Right.
It's 3 albums worth. Now, that said, I'm thinking of it now in terms of CDs. I'm trying to think of where the LPs broke up, but the 17, is it 17 proper songs that are on there? One better than the next. And by the way, guess what? Guess when many of those were birthed? During the Beatles, right? Doesn't mean that you get a pass. It just means that that's when they were written.
Right.
You Yes, I like the Apple Jam album. Of course, I like the Apple Jam album. We named a show after it, right? Apple Jam. Um, but Apple Jam on its own would not be a favorite album of mine. It's not the part of All Things Must Pass I go to all the time. It's kind of important. It kind of gave birth to an important band called Derek and the Dominoes. I mean,
Right.
it's an important record. And by the way, it's a great Jam album. Um, but cut for cut, pound for pound, I think Tug of War is easily as good. And, in my case, I would say better.
Hmm. Okay. Well, everyone has their opinion, and there's
Look, I mean, it's hard enough for me to get out of the gate telling people that it's Paul's best album. They're like, what
right.
about Band on the Run? You know what's wrong with that one? Also nothing. That's a masterpiece from opening to closing. And by the way, it opens and closes the same way. It's freaking brilliant. It's
Right.
great. Um, but what was kind of interesting, I remember this when Tug of War came out. And again, as I said earlier, Ken, all eyes were going to be on him.
Right.
And with Stephen Holden writing in Rolling Stone when I still used to read Rolling Stone because I found value in it. At the end, I mean, it's a 5-star album and just one good thing after another in this review. But he basically says, this is, I know how my father and mother used to feel when they got my report card and they'd say, we always knew he could do this. Like, he says, if he applied himself, right?
Right.
But they say, or Holden said, this is the album that leaves the rest of his solo career in the dust, including Band on the Run. He specified that one.
Hmm.
And again, that's an opinion. It's an opinion. And then, and that's exactly all it is. But what's kind of given me that nervous tick, like over the years, is every time a new Paul McCartney album would come out, when they'd be getting the hype machine
Hmm.
in order to be, this is Paul's best album since Band on the Run.
Uh-huh.
It has Band on the Run for sure has more name recognition or name brand recognition.
Mhm.
In fact, when I tell people Tug of War is my favorite, even people who are vaguely familiar with the story will say, "Oh, is that the one with Ebony and Ivory on it?" And I'm like, "Yes, that's right. It is the one with the most successful solo Beatles single of all time on it. Yes, it is.
Hmm.
You know, yes, in fact, it is."
You know, I could run off probably 10, maybe 11 albums from Paul. and Wings that I would consider to be great, truly great.
Only 10 or 11?
I'm sorry that
Yeah.
disappoints you.
Yeah.
I mean, I would
There are
rate
different
it as a
levels of
10.
greatness. There are different levels of greatness.
Yeah. Um, put it to you this way. If there was an album that came out and you loved every song on it but one, would it still be a great album? Or would it?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. So, okay, if we narrow this down and make it by the numbers, what would I consider the top shelf in no particular order? The top shelf. What do you want? My four favorite McCartney ones? Certainly Tug of War is on there. Absolutely Band on the Run is up there.
Hmm.
For me, Chaos and Creation in the Backyard
Me
is on there. Now, when you look at the whatever dozen or 13 songs or whatever is on Chaos and Creation, those two go in some order. There are some that I think are truly special and spectacular, and
too.
there are ones that are dutiful and they're good, and but they're maybe not as strong as the top end of that
Right.
album. Okay, but the album itself is uniformly terrific.
Right.
Yeah, so those might be for, and I mean, how am I not putting Ram in that little the top four? What do you need? The top four, top five? It's so hard, like to make a pyramid. I can absolutely pick my favorite Paul McCartney album, Tug of War.
Uh-huh.
The next tier, the next what, two, three, four, five, however many you want, I could probably do. The bottom one or two, I could probably pick. It's that middle where they're all really good.
Right.
They're really good. But it's that big bloated middle with just one or two that I would say that are the ones I listen to the least. Then there's the few at the top that I listen to the most.
You would be happy if every artist that are favorites of yours had albums where all of them were like the middle of Paul McCartney's.
That's right. No, I mean, look, I'm a huge, huge Bob Dylan fan. Okay. There is an absolute strata there of albums I could not live without and albums I could totally live without. There is. I mean,
Hmm. Okay.
there is. The guy's been incredibly prolific, and there are some records that didn't resonate with me at all, and then there are some that, again, they would be in that crate going down to the desert island.
Okay. I would definitely, just for my opinion here, the great albums of Paul McCartney would be chronologically Ram. I would put Red Rose Speedway in there because for me, even the weird stuff like Loop, I loved
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
And I love the whole medley and Little Lamb Dragonfly as a masterpiece.
yeah.
Band on the Run, Venus and Mars. I think Back to the Egg now deserves great status. Tug of War, Press to Play, Flowers in the Dirt, Flaming
Flowers,
Pie,
flaming pie.
uh, and Chaos and Creation in the Backyard. I
Yeah,
mean, Memory Almost Full, I brought up the one song thing because Gratitude is not my favorite song of his.
yeah. Well, you know, it's kind of weird.
Everything
It's
else
funny
I
that
like.
you picked Red Rose Speedway.
Yeah.
I always, honest to God, I think Red Rose Speedway is an absolutely terrific, top shelf, half an album. I love side one of that record,
Uh,
top to bottom. Big Barn Bed, right through Little Lamb Dragonfly. You got the big ballad, My Love, Get on the Right Thing, Big Barn Bed, all of it, top to bottom. That is a great album side. Great.
uh-huh.
Side two to me sounded too much like the previous record, Wildlife. To me, it was unpolished, it wasn't his best work. But Red Rose Speedway, I have to say this, is a very important Paul McCartney record. Frankly, I don't know that anybody would have believed it if he went from Wildlife to Band on the Run in one step.
Hmm.
I'm not to be funny about it. I mean, literally, could you? Those are in that big inverted pyramid I was telling you
Right.
about. Guess which one, Band on the Run and Wildlife? Guess what, where each of those are.
Right.
And Red Rose Speedway for me would be right in that. That might be the yellow line in the middle of the road
Right.
because I love side one of that record.
Hmm. You don't go for the medley?
I don't. I
Really?
don't. I
Huh.
don't. Although I have to say I've had some fun rediscovering the power cut, since we got the one hand clapping album,
Right.
you know.
Okay. I think it's so brilliant how all four songs come together at the end.
Yeah. To me that sounded like the very early side of Wings, the wildlife era. Not my favorite Paul period, but man, when he turns the corner and gets you to Red Rose Speedway, and yeah, a couple of those songs actually had their birth a couple albums early. They hold over from Ram.
Right.
Um, but you know what? If you got the tank that full and you're that prolific, I'm kind of glad he dipped in and dusted those off.
Right. Do you like it better as the double album as it was presented in the box set?
To me, you know what? Having kind of had a couple of different cuts of that over the years on various bootleg. Are we allowed to say bootlegs on this show?
Yeah.
Um, you know, none of them had it exactly right. There are some great tracks in there. I love having that live version of Best Friend in there. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's a terrific record. Um, that one might have been too diluted. Again, coming off of Wildlife, top 10 record, but top 10 wasn't cutting it for an ex-Beatle between 70 and 75. It had to be, had to be bigger than that.
Uh-huh.
And we all know, that he had a lot of pressure on him to cut that down to a single record. In the end, I think it's probably the right thing. Yes, anyone could do this. I could go take my side one that I love so much and make my own side two out of some of the songs from the box set
Mm.
that I'd say if I were sitting down with Paul and telling him exactly, how to make a record, this is what I'd do. Um, I don't often get that chance.
You don't think much of When the Night? I love that song.
Not a fan. I mean, it's not like you have to be between me and the CD player when it comes on because I'm going to go over there and eject it or anything. But how shall I put this? Has never been on a my favorite Paul McCartney tracks of the moment playlist.
Okay. All right. Okay. This has been terrific talking about Tug of War and other McCartney albums.
Yeah.
There's no, let me just think for 1 second. How about in comparing Tug of War to another solo Beatle album, how about Plastic Ono Band, which is so revered?
Plastic Ono Band, I love. Um, when I was in my, let me learn John, let me understand John, let me understand his music in the context of his life,
Right.
study John mode. It's an incredible record. It's astonishing, frankly. But it's musically it's not nearly as multidimensional as Tug of War. It's not meant to be. It's
Right.
supposed to be stripped down. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be bare bones. Um, there are songs on there that make it onto every John Lennon favorites compilation that I've ever made.
Hmm.
Um, I really love the ballads. I love Love and I love God. I mean,
Hmm.
some really great songs on there. Um, and the ones that are so deep and so personal, the things, certainly Mother, and Hold On and all of those, they're almost too personal. Like that's why a lot of people don't cover those songs. It's
Hmm.
because they're so personal. It's like reading somebody's diary as opposed to reading a book that someone wrote for the masses.
Right.
It's an astonishing record, Plastic Ono Band. Um, but that's one. It's more demanding listening. I mean, you have to be focused and in the right frame of mind for that one. His singing is incredible. It's
Yeah.
so visceral. Um, yeah. But again, musically, not as varied as things like even like the follow-up album, Imagine, which John of famously said, yeah, it's like Plastic Ono, only with sugar on it. Well, I
Right.
like a little sugar on my John
Right.
Lennon records. I love Imagine.
Right.
That's love Imagine. I mean, what's not to like on that record, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's interesting to hear your point of view, and I'm glad to see Tug of War being praised no matter what, because I remember when I first heard it, I fell in love with it. I actually then, as someone who probably favored Band on the Run and Venus and Mars the most, I was saying Tug of War is even better than this
Yeah.
back then. But I still, there's just so much to appreciate in this
Well,
catalog. It's really difficult to pinpoint and say this is definitely the best.
well, look, you go through like everybody. I'm sure most people watching this go through phases where they have a favorite, I don't know, John Lennon album, whether it's Imagine or Plastic Ono or Walls and Bridges, which for many, many years was my favorite John Lennon album. You knew
Uh,
that.
yeah.
Um, or Double Fantasy, or what some people call Single Fantasy. They take his songs from Milk and Honey and make and Double Fantasy and make one record out of it. Um, you and I go back to shortly after the release of Tug of War, probably somewhere in the mid 80s.
Hmm.
Have you ever heard me say I have a favorite Paul McCartney record other than Tug of War? I'm going to guess that's a big old no. Um,
Oh, I don't think so.
yeah, but the others, John, certainly I've hopped around and found different favorites. Even George. Now, look, I mean, All Things Must Pass. It's in a class by itself. It's a triple record. It's this mammoth, incredible record.
Hmm.
He has, I think, two albums that I think cut for cut are as good. There's just less of them. Okay, I love Cloud Nine. I mean, Cloud Nine is an astonishing record. I also love the self-titled album from '79, an astonishing record. Um, I have rediscovered one of your longtime favorites, Living in the Material World. I know that's a favorite of yours. I always liked it. Now I love it.
Uh-huh.
Okay, there's a difference. But I thought, like, if you took, I don't know, Cloud Nine and the self-titled, that's those stand up cut for cut,
Mhm.
with his very best work.
Right. I
So
feel that way about 33 and a third as well, and Brainwashed.
there's a lot to love there for
Right.
sure.
Hmm.
Sure, right here, just on George, I've mentioned three or four albums. John, I've mentioned three or four albums. Paul, it's one from 1982 to present. That has been my favorite Paul McCartney album for sure.
Okay. You've been steady through the years when it comes to this album, so.
Like a rock.
All right, we've been talking with Tom Frangione, who kind of has a new title at SiriusXM. He's the Grand High Exaltic Mystic Ruler of the
Hmm.
Beatles channel over there. Not exactly mystic, because he's on everywhere.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's no mystery involved. Yeah.
But you're involved with it's five shows now, right? It's hard to keep
Uh,
track of it all.
yeah, I host one, co-host, I'm sorry, I host two, co-host two, and write a fifth one. And sixth one coming up soon. That, by the way, we haven't announced it yet, but this sixth one, which is going to happen this summer, this might be my favorite one in a whole bunch. It's one I've been hoping to do since we launched. I put this idea forward and they said, that's a good one. Let's maybe next year that's in the pot. Or maybe we'll ask the Beatle who's involved in it. Maybe we'll do that. Or maybe. And this year we said, this is a go. And we are having a grand old time putting this thing together. It's going to be terrific. So maybe when that news breaks, you
Come
know,
back here.
let's put it this way. We could have a discussion about what this show will be about here and be here all day.
Okay. And that might happen. This could break the record with Peter Jackson on things we said.
Oh, let me tell you, we are having a ball with this show that's in development. And as they say, watch this space.
Okay. Thank you, Tom, for being here.
Not okay. That'll be very good, sir. Hey, if you
Okay.
know, you know. If you know, you know.
Thanks to everybody for watching. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. Come on back soon
You
and
bet.
listen to the Beatles channel on SiriusXM.
You bet. Thanks. Peace and love.
24 hours a day, Tom. All
Yeah,
right. Take care. We'll see you soon.
you bet.